Hey guys, and welcome back. This will be my monthly recap slash book review of all the books I read this month. I thought I would do something a little differently this month. Instead of filming all of the books and my thoughts on them at the end of the month, I'm going to be doing them in chunks. So I'll be reviewing them right after I finish reading the books. I just thought that this way the books and when I talk about them would be more fresh in my mind. We'll see how the transitions go. I don't know if it'll be choppy or if it'll run smoothly, but there's a first time for everything, and it'll be interesting to experiment with this type of format. So yeah, here we go. The first book I read and finished in the month of May was The Plotters by Kim Eun-soo. This is a Korean novel translated into English by Sora Kim Russell. The story takes place in an alternate contemporary Seoul, South Korea, where assassination guilds compete for market dominance. And as Korean society has moved from a dictatorship into a democracy, the need for contracted killings, basically assassins, is increasing, but also becoming more competitive as the market has changed to just hire anyone who is available to do the job, not focusing on the quality of the work anymore and the skill of the trade, but just anyone who can kill and disappear. The book follows our main protagonist, Ri-sang. He is a seasoned assassin who comes from the older generation of assassins. He was orphaned at birth and raised and mentored by a man who refers to himself as the Old Raccoon. Their assassination guild is called the Library. The story starts off with Ri-sang's assassination task to assassinate an old man in the mountains. He's looking at him from his sniper, and he watches this old man laugh and play with his dog. Ri-sang's supposed to kill him, but he hesitates. And that really sets the tone, just that action of his hesitation and decision that it's not the right time to kill his target for the rest of the novel. It also kind of starts to illustrate our protagonist as a very complex and interesting character. Fantastic world building, but what I really came away with was the characters that were introduced in this novel. They were all just so eccentric and memorable. We have Ri-sang, our main protagonist. He loves reading, he has 2 cats, and you really grow to like him as a protagonist. And then he'll do something like chop off someone's fingers and assassinate his targets. You question yourself, you're like, do I really like this character? But it builds him up as a very compelling, inquisitive, thought-provoking main protagonist. And same with all the other characters that end up getting introduced, like the bear, who's the owner of a pet crematorium, and the old raccoon, who is Ri-sang's mentor, and the barber, and Hanja, that, first of all, aren't confusing. Whenever characters get introduced in novels, sometimes I get overwhelmed and confused, but they were introduced very thoughtfully and slowly throughout the novel. Each of their backstories was just really thought-provoking as you really learned about who they were as individuals, their morals, the corruption in this industry. They are painted to be villains, but at the end of the day, you realize they're only human. We're all only human at the end of the day, each having our own reason for doing what we do. My takeaway was the fantastic world building, the truly amazing set of characters, but I didn't like the ending of this book. This ending was just questionable, and ending for every book is subjective to the reader and how they go through the story, but for me, the ending didn't feel like it was well done. That's just my opinion. Someone read this book and tell me what you think about the ending. Like, do you feel like it was a good ending? I feel like it wasn't a good ending. Did the ends justify the means? Yes, but did it wrap up in a way that the story was headed, where the story was headed. I don't know. I didn't like the ending. That was my takeaway. I didn't like the ending. Love the world, love the characters, didn't like the ending. Definitely a fascinating story if you're looking for a more of a slow story that really focuses on the characters, that's compelling, emotional, dark, but also slightly humorous thriller, then I definitely recommend The Plotters by Kim Eun-soo. The second book I read this month was The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie-Oh. I actually finished this book on my flight back from Orlando, and if I didn't have plans in Disney World, I think I would have finished this book in one sitting. The book was so enchanting and beautiful, like I was in a dream. Ada and a few other Goodread reviewers compare the aesthetic and environment of this world to Miyazaki's Spirited Away, and yes, I have to agree with that statement. Based off the plot summary of this book, I wasn't really sure what direction this book would take. I knew that it would be about a female protagonist named Mina and that she would sacrifice herself for her family and village to save them from the sea god's curse. And after finishing the book, I learned that there was a little bit of everything. There is bits of action, bits of adventure, and a subplot of romance, and of course folklore, but I wasn't expecting the emotion, the sheer power of emotion that would be in the writing and the storytelling. I teared up more than 3 times and almost cried while finishing this book on the way back from Orlando. It was just that emotionally powerful and truly tugged on my heartstrings. I really love the cultural detail and the vibrant descriptions of this spirit realm that this story took place. I also really loved each of the characters and how they each befriended Mina and helped her on her journey. But also, Axie-Oh did a truly amazing job at writing about the power of sacrifice and the importance of family, and also the struggle against predetermined fate. There is a mention of a red string of fate, which you might be familiar with if you watched like Kimi no Nawa, or if you just are familiar with Asian folklore, or I don't know if it's even Asian, but the red string of fate that ties you to the person you're destined with. The story just really makes you think about the power of choice and just defying the odds against predetermined fate. All in all, the details created a truly immersive and captivating experience that just tugged at my heartstrings. I don't know how else to describe it. This was honestly a really lovely surprise. I didn't have the highest, I didn't know. I didn't know what to expect going into it. But it was such a lovely surprise, and it was really nice to read after something heavy as The Plotters by Kim Eun-soo. This was just kind of a breath of fresh air. If you're a fan of fantasy, folklore, and stories with powerful female leads, I wholeheartedly recommend The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie-Oh for a truly enchanting and moving experience. The third book I read this month was Loot by Tanya James. This was an absolutely stunning historical fiction novel. It was adventurous, it was heartfelt, it was exciting, and I thought the writing was just absolutely vivid and colorful, and I might feel that way because the cover feels that way, but the writing was also very beautiful and imaginative. I might also be somewhat biased about this book because it had a slightly happy ending, and I feel like that is very different from some of the other historical fiction novels I've read. Some parts of the book were dark and bleak, as it does cover topics like colonialism and war. I also have to give a trigger warning that there are some animals that die in this book, not domesticated animals. I'm thinking of 2 animals right now, but I just gotta give a trigger warning. Also, I didn't give a trigger warning for the plotters, but a dog does die in that book. I know some people are really sensitive about animals dying in books, so I will say that the plotters in this book, there are some animal deaths in it. All in all, I just had a lot of fun reading this. It felt less like a history lesson and more like I was on an adventure through history. Luke takes place around 18th century India and later in England and France, and it follows a boy named Abbas. He is a Mysorean boy. He's a teenager at the time of the start of the novel, and then we follow him into adulthood. He is a talented woodcarver who is picked. He's selected to work with a French clockmaker to create a giant musical tiger automaton for Tipu Sultan. I'm totally butchering this language, I'm sorry. But he basically becomes an apprentice of this French clockmaker named Lucien Dulys. They're both tasked to build this giant tiger automaton as a present from the Sultan to his sons. I also learned that this giant tiger automaton that they build in this novel actually exists in real life, and that was Tanya James's inspiration for this novel. I believe you can see it at a museum in England, and it was actually built by a local Mysorean artist and a French engineer. So it was really incredible to see the imagination curated by the author around this actually existing historical artifact. I really enjoyed this novel just for the sheer storytelling. I really did feel spellbound. It has everything from war, love, and art, and it was really fun, and I really enjoyed reading this month. And also, a side note, I learned that Tanya James was a MFA professor at George Mason University, which is in Virginia, so that was kind of very crazy and coincidental to me. And I learned that either she lives or used to live in Washington, D.C. So I feel like I'm supporting a local author in a way. And if you're in Virginia, can you sign my book? But yes, this book was lovely. It's almost the end of May now and it's getting freaking hot outside. So I'm repping a tank top today and turned up the AC, so hopefully it'll cool down. But speaking of hot, you know what was hot? It was the 4th book I read this month, which was The Kiss Quotient by Helen Huang. And I swear I take care of my books, but I actually lent my physical copy to my best friend Tiffany. This is actually a library book, so I could read it by the end of this month. My first statement is this book was H-O-T, hot. Sweet, but hot. The spice in this book turns up in the first 20 pages. That has never happened before in all the other contemporary romance books I've read. I think because all of the other romance books I've read are more of a slow burn. This one was kind of just right up in your face, but I loved it. And I started reading this while I was at Sammy's volleyball game at a church, and I had to put it down. My eyes were like saucers while I was at this church reading this book, and I just put it down and read it the next day because it was just too spicy to read in such a holy place. This book is how you write steamy scenes. The chemistry between Stella and Michael was absolutely superb. This was just chef's kiss in terms of writing hot, spicy scenes. The Kiss Quotient follows our main female protagonist. Her name is Stella Lane, who is actually autistic, so she struggles with things like physical intimacy and touch and just dating in general. She thinks it's a great idea to get practice in these areas by hiring a professional. And in this case, she hires an escort named Michael Fan to get her comfortable with things like intimacy and navigate the different avenues of just dating and relationships. I learned actually at the end of the novel in the acknowledgments that the author, Helen Huang herself, while learning of her daughter's autism, learned that she herself fell on the spectrum, and at 34 she was actually diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, previously known as Asperger's. And I think this fact made the main character's challenges and nuances in the book more authentic. Stella's struggle with sensory overload and insecurity and discomfort with social interaction felt very realistic. And it's refreshing to see a character who embraces her neurodiversity. Words are hard today. And also it was really nice to see Asian representation through the novel as well, through not the female protagonist, but actually the male protagonist in the book, whose name is Michael Fan. He's half Vietnamese and half Swedish, so you really see the Vietnamese culture come out through his family. A lot of Vietnamese food was mentioned, and even the clothing. That was just nice to see culturally represented in a romance book. There were times in the novel where I was like, please communicate with each other, stop being in your mind. But I feel like that struggle is just very normal in all romance movies and shows and K-dramas and even mangas, so I won't complain too much on that front. I will also say I didn't get the usual butterflies in my stomach that I usually feel with romance novels, but I think that's because this book was less of a slow burn than the other romance books I've read recently, because of the fact that they had to get so physically intimate so quickly. And it was my first time reading a fake dating trope. I've read a lot of enemies to lovers and rivals to lovers, I think, recently. I'm trying to think. Yeah, this is the first really fake dating trope I've read. That was just new to me. I still devoured the book, but I didn't get the usual butterflies. Truly a great romantic novel with unique characters and steamy romance and just a really fun story. So, recommend this to you romance lovers out there. Last but not least, the final book I read this month was Novelist as a Vocation by Haruki Murakami. You may have already heard me talk about this book just very briefly on my recent reading vlog. I may repeat some things in terms of my thoughts and opinions. Novelist as a Vocation is a collection of various essays that Haruki Murakami published in a Japanese magazine around 2015. His chapters range from discussing his origins as a writer to discussing where and when to write novels. So it's not only a reflection of his career as a writer, but also a blend of writing advice and a memoir. Like I mentioned in my blog, I thought this book was okay. It wasn't what I was expecting of a memoir and writing piece, very different from Stephen King's memoir on writing. There are parts of the book I liked and parts of the book I didn't like. I, first of all, really enjoyed learning about Haruki Murakami as a person, as an author. I learned how he grew up, how he became a writer, how he stumbled upon deciding to write his first book, which was at a Japanese baseball game, by the way. He talks about his writing process and his personal thoughts on literary critics, literary prizes, and the Japanese education system / school system. And I really love his analogies and metaphors. The parts I didn't like about the book was the way this book was put together. Because it's a collection of essays, it just felt a little choppy and a lot of parts felt repetitive. At times he does sort of ramble. I found my mind wandering and I just feel like I lost him. I don't know if that was a problem with me or a problem with staying engaged with what he was saying, but I didn't like the formatting of the novel, and his writing advice was, it felt like common sense in a way. I don't know if the writing advice he gave was truly helpful. Maybe aspiring writers, you can read this book and let me know what you think about his writing advice, but personally I didn't think it was that helpful. Yeah, by common sense he would talk about like being consistent and finding what works for you, which is, I feel like I don't need to be told that, I kind of know that. If you're a fan of Murakami and his works, I do think you would enjoy learning about his writing process and who he is as an author. But if you're a person trying to pursue writing or looking for writing advice, probably would not recommend this book for that. That's a wrap of all the books I read in May. Some truly amazing characters and stories and just very unique viewpoints and perspectives in all these books I've read. This month was Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander month, so I did try to curate my May TBR and list based off of Asian or Asian American authors. Just like Asian representation in media and arts, I think Asian authors bring diversity in perspective and representation in literature. It allows readers of Asian descent to see themselves reflected in literature, but also brings a unique cultural experience and viewpoint in their writings. It's a great way to really expand your literary horizons and gain deeper appreciation for different cultures. So definitely check out some of these books written by Asian or Asian American authors. There's some truly amazing characters that were written and unique stories. Thanks again for joining me on my book review. It was a little long, so thanks for sticking around if you made it to the end. And if you like this video, would love it if you could like and subscribe and come back for more content. All right, bye.